So, many people have told me that my video on doing an unattended install of Windows 11 is kind of outdated. And after checking it out, I completely agree. So today, we're going to revisit the topic of how to do an unattended install of Windows 11 that bypasses not only the hardware requirements and the Microsoft account requirements, but like before, once you make the thumb drive, you don't have to do anything. It just installs itself. Oh, and I almost forgot, it's even more debloated than it was before. Stay tuned. So, we've done numerous videos on installing Windows 11 on unsupported hardware. In fact, I've given you so many options on how to achieve this that it's practically like Windows 11 doesn't even have hardware requirements anymore. I've also shown you several different methods on how to debloat Windows 11. We've even recently updated our video on how to bypass the Microsoft account requirements. But the one thing that all of these topics have in common is that they require you to do extra work when installing Windows 11. Well, some people don't want to do extra work. And if that's you, then this video is for you, because I'm going to show you how to do all three by just putting a USB drive into your computer and hitting the power button. But first, I got to pay some bills. So check out today's sponsor. Are you still running Windows 11 unactivated because the license just costs too much? Then you should check out today's sponsor, VIP-SCDKey, where you can get a valid Windows 11 license for around $20. Stop dealing with that stupid watermark and actually be able to change your desktop background with a valid license for Windows 11. Just go to the link in the description below and pick up a valid Windows 11 license key. During checkout, use the code CyberCPU for a 25% discount. Once you have your key, go to your activation settings in Windows 11 and click the link that says Change Product Key. Enter the product key you just purchased and hit Activate. Now you don't have to deal with that stupid watermark. And check out the description for deals on not just Windows, but Office too. Now, on with the video. So today I'm going to be showing you how to do an unattended install of Windows 11. If you're unfamiliar with what an unattended install is, it's actually a pretty simple concept. Essentially, we're going to be creating an XML file that does all the work of installing Windows for us. So, all the normal questions that you have to answer when installing Windows, this XML file is going to do all that for you. All the extra work that you have to do when installing Windows 11 on unsupported hardware, or debloating and even bypassing your Microsoft account, this XML file will handle all of that. And it's going to be done automatically without any user input at all. Unless, of course, you want to have input on certain settings. And if that's the case, we're going to talk about that too. So without further ado, let's jump on the computer and I'll show you how to set it up. Okay, just like before, we're going to be doing all this from this website right here. This is essentially a generator where we answer a bunch of questions and it generates the XML file for the unattended install of Windows 11. So essentially all we got to do is go through here and answer questions. This is the same website that we used before, but a lot has been added to this. So we're going to go through some of the new settings. We're actually going to go through pretty much all the settings. We're going to go start over from scratch and set up an unattended install of Windows 11. So the first thing right here is your language. So here you can check which language that you want to create your Windows install of. Now, I'm going to leave this one on English because I'm creating an English language. However, you can decide if you want to add secondary languages or even a third language to your install. And this might help so you can switch between them on an install. So for instance, if you happen to be a German speaker, but you want an English copy of Windows, you can do that and then you can add the German language to it as well. Now, I'm not going to be setting up any of that, so we can move on. And then also, we can also say what our home location is. And obviously mine is going to be the United States. Or you can also come and check this box right here and have the entire process use the interactive menus when you're setting up. But we don't want to click any menus. We want to move on to the next step then. Now in this one right here, you can decide to set up different architectures. So if you want to set up a 64-bit version of Windows, a 32-bit, or an ARM version of Windows, you can select that here. You can also, by holding the control key, you can highlight multiples. So if you want to say, for instance, there's no reason to set up a 32-bit anymore because there is no 32-bit Windows support and there hasn't been in years. So you can really disregard that one and just go to 64-bit. But if you want, you can hit Control Control and select Windows on ARM as well. And what that will do, it will allow you to install this on either a 64-bit Intel-based processor or an ARM processor. But for mine, I'm gonna go ahead and stick with just 64-bit. Okay, so the next step is the setup settings. Now, obviously, we wanna bypass Windows 11 system requirements. This will be TPM, secure boot, and things of that nature. So we're gonna go ahead and check that one right there. And then the next setting is allow Windows 11 to be installed without an internet connection. Now, I'm not going to check this. And if you actually read this note behind here, it says to only check this if you really don't have internet access. So I'm gonna go ahead and leave this one unchecked. And we're gonna go ahead and get around the Microsoft account requirement in a completely different way that I'll show you later on in the thing. So this one I would recommend leaving unchecked unless you actually intend on installing this without internet. And then we can also skip the use distribution share configuration settings. This is a different way of setting up an auto-unattended XML file, and it sets it up through an OEM folder. And this is helpful if you have other things like an OEM like a Dell or HP and things like that might set up installed disk just like this. However, I'm not gonna go that deep into it in this video, so we're gonna go ahead and leave that unchecked right here. But the next setting where it says hide any PowerShell windows during setup, I am gonna go ahead and check this one because this is helpful. So if you're installing Windows 11, like I said, it's completely unattended. It will do everything on its own. But if a PowerShell script comes up and you close that script, then it could actually cause the script itself to stop executing. So I'm gonna go ahead and hide all the PowerShell scripts and they'll just run in the background while Windows is setting up. Okay, when it comes to computer name, I'm gonna go ahead and leave that default, but if you like to set up a computer name, you can do that right here and you can choose a name, or you can even write a PowerShell script that will generate random names for you. So if you're setting up a bunch of computers and they have a specific naming scheme, then you could do that with this one as well. And then the next thing, this one right here might be a little bit confusing. It's the Compact OS, and it's asking you whether or not you want to or don't want to set up a Compact OS. Now, this is one setting that was specifically mentioned by a few people that let me know that this website here had been updated. Intuitively, it may make you think that enabling this would be better. Unfortunately, though, it's not. Enabling Compact OS has nothing to do with debloating Windows or making it run better. Compact OS is a feature that Windows supports when it's being used on a system with extremely limited storage space. What it does is it compresses all of the system files so they take up less room on your storage device. Unfortunately, though, what this does is it requires the operating system to use more CPU cycles to compress and decompress system files constantly. Now, on modern hardware, you're probably not going to see a huge hit in performance, but on older systems, it's going to make Windows run a lot slower. So I recommend leaving this setting turned off. In fact, I wouldn't even leave it at its default setting. I would just turn it off completely, unless, of course, you have a specific reason to turn it on, like a computer that's heavily restricted in its storage space. Now, let's move on to the next setting. And for time zone, I'm going to go ahead and just let Windows determine the time zone. But if you want, you can set the time zone explicitly just by checking this and selecting which time zone you want. And when we come down to the partitioning section, this right here, there's tons of different options here. So we're going to have to go through all the different options. But what you could do is you could partition the disk with the interactive wizard that is part of Windows Setup. However, we want this all to be done automatically. We don't want it to be done with the interactive setup. But for me, I'm going to set it to let Windows set up, wipe, partition, and format the hard drive. And for that, I'm going to set it to GPT. I'm going to leave the system file partition to 300 megabytes as its default, but you could override that if you wanted to. And we're also going to install a recovery partition. And this one, you can also change the size of the recovery partition too, but I would probably leave this at default. Now, alternatively, you can create a disk part script to create your partitions for you. And this might be something that you may want to do if you have specific partitions you want to create that this wizard up here won't allow you to create. You could do it here and you could create, like maybe you wanted to create a data drive, even though I highly recommend against using data drives. But if you wanted to, you could create your own custom script that would do that for you. And then as we scroll down here, as you can see, this right here, this is a beta feature right here, but it's something that could come in handy on certain systems. You see, what happens up here is when you select this top one right here, it automatically wipes disk 0 specifically. And on some systems, disk 0 might not actually be the hard drive. So if we scroll down here, you can see that this script right here tries to detect whether or not disk 0 is a primary hard drive. And it makes sure that it's not like your USB drive. Because what could happen is your USB thumb drive that you're actually using to install Windows could be detected as disk 0. And it wouldn't make much sense to wipe that and partition it for Windows. So this script right here will check for that and stop the installation if something like that comes up. However, this won't actually fix the problem. It just stops the install to save data. So now, these settings right here can get you into a lot of trouble if you don't understand what they're for. Like I showed you here, there's a couple different ways you can set this up. You can leave it default and partition the disk using the Windows Setup GUI. This would mean that you would have to do the setup partitions like you would normally with any other install of Windows. Alternatively, like I chose, you can allow setup to automatically wipe the drive and do the partitioning for you. Now, if you truly want your setup to be unattended, then this is the setting that you would choose. Just keep in mind though, that it takes the primary storage device on the system and wipes it without any user interaction. There's a few ways this could go really bad. For instance, if you're using an M2 SSD and you also have another hard drive connected to the system, then oftentimes that hard drive will take drive 0 position while the M2 SSD will take the drive 1 position. If that's the case, then it will automatically install Windows 11 to the hard drive instead of the M2 drive. And if you have data on that hard drive, it's going to destroy it. What I recommend in these cases is to disconnect all the drives on the system except for the drive that you want Windows installed on. Then let the script do its thing. However, if you don't want to do that and you want to have control over which drive gets installed, then I recommend doing the setting of just letting the factory GUI partition it manually. I mean, it's not going to be as unattended as it could be, but it would be a little less dangerous. But now let's get back to the system and I'll show you the next setting. Okay, so as we scroll down here, we can either use a generic product key. This way it won't ask you at all what version of Windows you're installing. So in this case, we're going to do Windows Pro, and every time it installs, it's going to install Windows Pro. Now, if you have a volume license key or a license key that you want to add to this specifically, you could check this and you could add that license key if you want. Or you could enter a product key interactively during Windows Setup. And this essentially would mean this would be the same way that Windows Setup works now. It would just require you to do something, and it's not really very unattended. And then alternatively, you can also use the product key that's stored in the BIOS or UEFI firmware. Now, if you have a cookie cutter computer like a Dell or an HP or something like that, a lot of times it already has the product key stored in the BIOS. So that way you don't have to deal with it. You can just check that, and then the Windows setup already knows what version of Windows to install. Now, what I'm going to use a generic product key, and I'm going to set mine to Windows Pro. Now, if you find yourself installing Windows Pro the majority of the time, then this comes in pretty handy. But if you don't, and you want to go ahead and enter it interactively, then you can check this one right here. It's just that's going to be a step that you're going to have to take when you're setting up Windows. Now next, if we go into user accounts right here, here's where we can actually bypass the Windows account requirements. And the way you can do that is by actually creating the accounts beforehand. For instance, right here, what we can do is I'm going to go ahead and get rid of admin, and I'm going to get rid of user as well. And we're going to start the top one as just my name, Rich. And I'm going to put me as the administrator group. Now, if I left it at this setting, what it would do is it would completely skip the account setup process, and it would just automatically create a local account named Rich as an administrator. And then if you go down to the next section right here, it asks you if you want that login to be the account that the computer logs into automatically. Or you can activate the built-in administrator account and use that account to log into Windows. However, I highly recommend against doing this right here. Because what happens is at some point in time in the future, if anyone decides to go from the local built-in administrator account and sign on to a Microsoft account, you will never be able to get off of that Microsoft account again. You'll never be able to go back to a local account without reloading the system. This is a bug in Windows, and I haven't seen it in a while, but I don't think Microsoft has fixed it. So I would highly recommend against activating the built-in administrator account. But you could also set it to just not log in at all. And if by doing that, it'll leave you at the login screen like the way Windows normally works. Now, alternatively, you can also add an online Microsoft account and use the default interactive setup when you're setting up Windows to set up a Microsoft account. Now, we want to bypass the Microsoft account, so we don't want to use that at all. But what I am going to use is to add a local offline user account interactively during Windows setup. Now, this is going to mean that it's not going to be as unattended. Like if you set this top one right here, you won't have to make any choices. It'll just do it for you. Now, on this one setting, I want to have control of this one right here. So this is the one setting I'm going to take control over so I can create different user accounts on different systems as I'm setting up Windows. And scrolling on to the next setting, we have password expiration. Now, this one here is essentially by default, its passwords don't expire. And this is the one that I'm going to leave it on. However, if you want, you can use it to where passwords will expire either every 42 days, which would be the default for Windows, or you can use custom password expiration. So you could say passwords expire every 3 days and drive whoever's using the computer absolutely crazy by requiring them to change their password every 3 days. Don't do that to people. That would be really annoying. I'm going to go ahead and select mine to passwords don't expire. And scrolling down to the next setting, we have the account lockout policy. Now, essentially what this means is after 10 failed login attempts, Windows will essentially lock you being able to log in for about 10 minutes. Now you can, if you want, you can disable this policy if you want. Now, unfortunately, this will make your system susceptible to brute force attacks. But if you forget your password a lot and often take more than 10 tries to guess it, then maybe this might be a thing that you can disable. But you can also create a custom policy as well. So maybe you forget your password all the time, but you always remember it within 12 tries. You can change it here if you want. I'm going to go ahead and use the default policy on mine, but just know that you can change this policy if you want to. Now, scrolling on to the next setting, these are File Explorer tweaks. Now, the first section up here gives you the opportunity to change some of the built-in settings in File Explorer. And this one right here is the default setting of system files, and hidden files are in fact hidden. Now, you could decide that you want to hide protected operating system files, but you want to show hidden files. And if you want to do that, you can select this one right here. Or alternatively, you can show all files, and then all hidden files and system files will be visible. Now, I'm going to go ahead and leave mine default, but this is a setting that you can set here because I know a lot of people like to change this setting after Windows is installed. And instead of doing that, you can just do it here and never have to mess with it. Now, scrolling down, there's a couple other settings right here too. Like you can also show file extensions, and this is a really popular setting, especially for people that are security conscious, because by not showing file extensions, you can inadvertently be susceptible to malware attacks because someone might download a PDF document, but that PDF document is actually an executable. So by showing file extensions, you'll never fall victim to one of those scams. I'm going to go ahead and leave that unchecked on mine because I like to live dangerously. But the next one is one I'm definitely going to check, and this is to use the classic context menu. So by checking that, essentially what you're disabling is this right here. It's this new Windows 11 context menu, and what it'll do is it'll go back to this one, which is the old classic context menu. And I like the fact of being able to change that in Windows setup and never having to mess with it. It's a good feature. And then the next setting for Open File Explorer to this PC instead of quick access is another one that I'm going to check because that's something I typically change once I install Windows anyway. And finally, you can also show the end task command in the taskbar if you want by checking this one here. Now, moving on to the next section, we got the start menu and taskbar. Now, this allows you to choose how you want the start menu actually configured in Windows 11. Now, this is a new section in this little wizard right here, and I like it a lot. You can either have it full, which would be the default setting. You can have the icon and the label, or you can have just the search icon, or you can hide it completely. Now, I'm gonna go ahead and hide it completely, but you can go ahead and choose whatever you want in this little section right here. Now, scrolling down, there's a couple of settings that you can make right here. And essentially what this is it chooses the default icons that are gonna display in the taskbar. That's all of these icons down here. That's gonna be like your Copilot and your Explorer and your, whatever you have, like Teams right here, whatever comes default with Windows. Now, what you can do is you can either remove all the icons completely, or you can configure an XML file that will choose which icons to add and which icons not to. Now, you're gonna have to go ahead and modify this manually, and I'm not going to do that in this specific video, but you can look at Microsoft's documentation if you want to take use of this. This would be helpful if you want to add a shortcut to the taskbar by default without having to actually pin it once you set up Windows. It'll just do it for you automatically here. Now, what I'm going to do though is remove all icons so we can start from scratch. And also, I'm going to disable widgets as well. And that's going to be this little section right here in the bottom. And I always disable that when I set up Windows 11. So this way, I can just do it automatically. And then the next setting is left aligning the taskbar in Windows 11. And essentially what that means is moving the start menu over to the left-hand side of the screen. And then the next one is to hide the task view button from taskbar. And that's this one right here. And I also hide that all the time. And then this next one right here is always show all tray icons. And what that is if you look down on the bottom right here, you have this little arrow. And when you click on that, it shows all these tray icons that are kind of pushed up here that aren't taking up room or real estate on your taskbar itself. If you want to show all of those and not have some of them auto hide, then you can check this. However, I kind of like the auto hide feature. But this next setting is another really good one. And this one right here, it says do not show Bing results when searching in the start menu. That's definitely one I'm gonna click. So if you click right here and you were to search for, let's just search for CyberCPU. As you can see, it comes up with Bing search results in the taskbar. Now, these are search results that are much better than normal because it's me. But if you want to look for something that's on the computer and you want to use the search, sometimes you don't want to see what's on the web. You want to just see what's on the computer itself. I may possibly have a document called CyberCPU, and I got to go through all of these web results before I find the local result or search on the different options down here. So with this setting right here, you can just check this and it won't show Bing results when searching in the start menu at all. Now, this next section right here only applies if you're setting up this wizard for Windows 10. Now, this does work for Windows 10 and 11, but we're mainly covering Windows 11 because unfortunately Windows 10 is going to lose support soon. But any changes that you make right here, these right here are essentially going to be the tiles in the Windows 10 start menu. And you can set this up. You can either customize the tiles, you can remove all the tiles, or you can use the default tiles. Now, if you're doing this for a Windows 11 setup, it's going to ignore this entire section, so you don't even have to worry about it. But for Windows 11, it's essentially the same thing. It's going to ask you what essentially are the default pins that you want to have pinned inside of the start menu. Now, a lot of times what Microsoft will do is when you're uninstalling bloatware, these programs are not installed, only the icons are pinned to the start menu. So it's kind of their shifty little way of getting bloat on your system without technically installing it. So by going here and using the default pins, it's going to allow Microsoft to install these default pins. Alternatively, you can remove all pins, and by doing that, you won't have anything pinned to the start menu, and that's the way I'm going to do it. But you can also create a PowerShell script here that will allow you to pin different links. And as you can see, as an example, it has Microsoft Edge, File Explorer, and Microsoft Windows Immersive Control Panel. So it's the Windows settings. So this one is just an example right here, but it gives you the opportunity to create your own pins if you want to, or you can just remove all of them like I'm going to do. Okay, so the next section we're looking at is system tweaks right here. Now, these next few things that we've been going through right here have tons of settings. As you can see, there's lots of different settings you can make on this one right here. So I'm just going to kind of fly through some of the ones that I think are important. For one, I would not recommend disabling Windows Defender or Windows Update. You can do it if you want, but I highly recommend against it. You can also disable the user account control control. As a default, I wouldn't suggest doing it, but that's up to you. You can also disable Smart App Control. You can disable that in here if you want. And you can same thing with disable Smart Screen from Windows and Edge. And then you also have disable Fast Startup. Now, some people don't like Fast Startup. Me personally, I like it, but if you want to turn it off, you can do that right here. And then next you have disable system protection or system restore. I highly recommend against doing this, but even if you don't check this, Windows pretty much does this anyway. So, however, moving on, this setting is one that I do recommend turning on, and this one's long paths. And then I would suggest against automatically enabling remote desktop services. This one right here, if you want to turn on remote desktop for a specific system, this should be something you do manually. This isn't something you should turn on by default. However, if you're setting up, say, 100 computers for an organization and they all need to have remote desktop turned on, well, that's the reason for an auto unattended install. It makes it really easy to do this when you're setting up. So skipping through some of these, you can also go through, you can allow execution of PowerShell scripts. You can not update the last access timestamp. You can prevent Windows Update from rebooting your computer. You can turn off all system sounds. So as you can see, there's tons of different things that you can do in this section of this wizard here. You can also disable app suggestions in the content delivery manager. This one I highly suggest turning off. This is essentially where you go down to here and you get these Microsoft suggests you install this app. Well, I don't care what Microsoft suggests. You can disable that right here. You can also prevent device encryption. And essentially what this is this would be the automatic BitLocker encryption that happens in Windows 11. And I highly recommend turning that off because it's a nightmare if you want to do data recovery later on if you have an issue and you don't realize that you've been encrypting your hard drive the entire time. You can also disable Microsoft Edge's first run experience, which is kind of annoying when you first set up Windows and you have to download Chrome or Brave or another browser, and you got to go through all of those stupid dialog boxes in order to get Edge to run for the first time. And another thing I like to disable is Edge Startup Boost. If you turn it off, it will save you the resources of having Edge run in the background if it's a browser that you're not using anyway. And if you want, you can also make Edge uninstallable. And this means once you install Windows, you can go in and you can uninstall Edge. But unfortunately, if you don't uninstall Edge right away once Windows is installed, then eventually Microsoft will make it uninstallable again through Windows Update. But it's something that you can do at the very beginning if you'd like. You can also disable the enhanced pointer precision, which is really popular with some first-person shooters. You can delete empty Windows old folders or the audit process for creation events. So these right here are all the different things that you can do just in this one section of system tweaks. So there's tons of different things. I'm sure everybody's going to choose something different, but those are the choices that I made on mine specifically. And hopefully my explanations for why are relevant. And when it comes to visual elements, I'm going to go ahead and leave this default. But for some people like to kind of tweak the way that Windows looks. And what this will do is it'll either allow you to adjust it all for best appearance or best performance, or you can come through and do custom settings and disable certain things. Like for instance, the way that the start menu slides up and slides down, you can disable that. And you can do that all in this section right here. But for me, I'm going to leave all this default. And you can also show different desktop icons. So if you want the control panel to automatically show up on the desktop, you can do that right here. However, for me, I'm just going to show the default desktop icons. And then moving on, right here is the virtual machine support. So if you're going to be installing this on a virtual machine, you can install the add-ons or the tools for that virtual machine right here. Unfortunately though, like you'll see later in this video, I'm going to be installing this in VirtualBox just to test it out. But I checked this one and it didn't do anything. It didn't actually install the add-ons. So this section here may or may not work. It just depends on your configuration. Now, if we scroll down to the next one, we have the Wi-Fi and wireless LAN setup. If you want, you can set up a system to automatically connect to your wireless network without having to do it once you set up. With me personally, I'm going to go ahead and skip this entire section because it's not that hard to set up Wi-Fi once you're installed. And then moving on to the next section, this is essentially the diagnostic data that Windows collects from you at a pretty regular basis. You can either disable all of it, which is the default setting in this wizard. You can enable all of it, is which what Microsoft really wants you to do, or you can choose the settings interactively during Windows setup. Now, essentially what this is that last screen in setup that has all the little checkboxes that have you, do you want to enable this or disable this? And if you want, you can either enable them all, disable them all, or choose which settings interactively. I'm going to go ahead and hit disable them all because I typically always disable them all. And this way I don't have to do that. It'll just do it for me. Now, this next setting I think is pretty useful. You guys might not find it as useful as me, but this is the default lock key configuration. So if you want your system to automatically have numlock turned on when you turn the computer on or when you set up Windows, you can set that state right here. And you can do the same with caps lock or scroll lock. However, most people don't automatically run scroll lock and caps lock, but numlock is one that always should, in my personal opinion, should always be on. But since I've been getting into mechanical keyboards lately, half of my computers don't even have a number pad. So this setting may or may not matter to you. It just depends. Now in this next setting, this personalization setting, this one here, this has some more new settings that we didn't have in the last wizard that we had before. Now essentially these are going to be your Windows background and your Windows color. And so for right now, you can either use the default color theme or you can use a custom color theme. I'm going to go ahead and use custom. I'm going to set mine to dark and dark. And you can also change the accent color. You can show the accent color on the start menu and taskbar and show the color on title bars and Windows surfaces that appear translucent. However, if you scroll to the bottom one, this one right here I think is really neat. You can use just the default Windows wallpaper if you want, or you can use just a solid background color. But you can also write a PowerShell script that downloads a wallpaper image for you. And as an example, they have an image right here with a web address that goes to this specific image right here. Now, I'm not going to use their image, but if we right click right here and we go to it, you'll see this is the image. Now, it's a good image, but I have a better idea. How about this one? So this is the image I want to use in mine. So to do that, all you got to do is find an image anywhere online. It has to be an image that opens up as a regular image file in your browser. And find that image, go ahead and copy the link to it, come back to this script, highlight just the web address right here, and then paste your web address that you got for your image, and then you can do it that way. Now, there is a way, I didn't play around with it enough to be able to actually do this, but there is a way to actually save the image onto the USB drive and have it use that image that way. But instead, the way that I set it up right here is to just download the image and use it that way, and that works pretty well. Now, moving on to the next step, this is where you can actually debloat Windows, and you can have it as debloated or as not debloated as you want to have. All you have to do is just select which applications you do not want installed. So by default, all of them are unchecked. This means it's going to install all of these. So what you can do is you can go through and you can check stuff that you don't want installed. So I'm going to go ahead and go through here and select some of the things that I don't want installed on the computer. Recall happens to be one of them, and I know a lot of you guys really don't like recall, like myself included. But if you go through here, you can uncheck all the different things that you don't want to install. As you can see, there's several things that I do want to have installed, but you can choose all the things that you don't want, like for instance, OneSync, Office 365, none of this I want. And we go to Cortana, Clipchamp, Bing Search, nope, none of that stuff right there. And if we scroll through here, I may actually be missing some things, like OneDrive, I don't want OneDrive. The news, I never use it, I'm not gonna mess with it. Teams is definitely one I don't want. Skype is one that I don't want. And you get the idea. You can go through here, check or uncheck all of the programs that you don't want to have on the system. And once you set up Windows, these programs won't be installed. And then moving on to the next one, we have this run custom scripts. Now, this one right here, unfortunately, I couldn't get to work. Now, this setting here, I really wanted to get working for this video. Unfortunately though, I couldn't. They have a web page showing example scripts that you can use on their page to kind of show how to pre-install Google Chrome. Unfortunately, every time I tried to use that script, it just locked up in the middle of the setup process. So I'm sure it's something I'm doing wrong and there is a way to get this to work. But unfortunately, I didn't get it done before making this video. However, if you can get this to work, then let me know down in the comments below because this is a really cool feature. But let's get back and finish this script up. Okay, so scrolling down here, we're gonna go ahead into the next section, which is Windows Defender Application Control. Now this one right here, I'm just gonna go ahead and leave this one at default, but you can kind of go through and see if there's any changes that you might wanna make on this. But for the most part, I'm gonna go ahead and leave this one default. And the same thing with the XML markup for more components. Now this one right here, this is something that I'm really not going to get into in this specific video. It's more for advanced installs that you may want to make. So I'm going to go ahead and leave that one for you guys to research, and we're not going to touch it in this specific video. Now the last setting right here is the download settings. Now if you want, it can rename the XML file for you, but this is, and it explains why you might want to do this right here, but we're not going to do any of that. Essentially the last setting that we're going to do is right here where it says download the XML file. And then by doing that, we're going to go ahead and download it. If we click on here and open this up, as you can see, I already did this once a couple days ago. So we're going to go ahead and delete the one I did before. And we're going to go ahead and rename this one right here and make sure we take whatever any letters may have been added off of it, because it has to be named autounattended.xml for it to work the way that we want it to work. But once we have this completed, what we need is our USB drive with our Windows installation on it. So I'm going to go ahead and stick that onto the system right here. It's going to take a second for it to open up. Okay, so here's my USB drive with Windows install on it. If we open this up, this is the same one I used in the video last when we did the bypass NRO, so it still has my script in here for bypassing NRO. That's another way to get around the Microsoft account requirements, but what we're going to do isn't going to need that script at all. So what we're going to do is we're going to essentially take this auto-attended file, this XML we just created, we're going to drag it over and we're going to drop it into our USB drive. And at that point, that's it. Our USB drive is done and ready to go. But we're going to need to test that. So in order to test that, I'm going to do that in VirtualBox. So we're going to go ahead and set up VirtualBox to install Windows 11. So to do that, we already have the XML file added to it. So all we got to do is go ahead and hit start. Now in VirtualBox, the only thing that we're going to have to click is once the virtual machine starts, it has the please hit any key to boot from CD. Once you do that, it should just work at this point. So setup is going to take a while to install, but at this point, you shouldn't have to touch anything on the system. It should just set up Windows, other than the fact that we configured it to prompt us for a username. So once the username prompt comes up, we're going to have to do that. So with the magic of video editing, we'll skip right to that point and get back to it. Okay, so here we are in Windows 11. We didn't have to touch a single thing up to this point. But of course, we're going to need to enter a username. And once we do that, we're going to put my username. I'm going to hit next. I can choose a password at this point and hit next. And it'll finish the setup without asking any more questions, because all the questions have already been answered in the auto-attended file. So we're going to go ahead and let it finish what it's doing. And I'll meet you back here once we're in Windows 11. Okay, so here we are. Windows 11 is installed, and as you can see, there's nothing here. And if you wait just a moment, all of our personalization settings will take effect, and there we go. Now we've got the dark theme and we've got the background that we chose earlier. But as you can see, we have none of the bloatware that typically comes with Windows 11. We definitely don't have a Microsoft account. And if you scroll through the apps, you can see that it didn't install all the apps that we told it we didn't want it to install. So this is a great way to set up Windows 11, and it was essentially almost completely automatic. So as you can see, this entire process is extremely useful, but there are some warnings that I have to reiterate here. If you create this USB to automatically wipe the primary drive, then make sure that you don't leave this USB plugged into any computer that you don't want wiped. Because if you forget about it and then someone else comes and later turns the computer on, this USB right here could potentially wipe all your data, because it unapologetically wipes the drive without any warnings whatsoever. So if that concerns you, then make sure that you follow the directions above and use the GUI to manually set up the partitions. You don't have to have this thing automatically partition the drive for you, but it's very useful if it does. Because if you want a USB drive that is completely unattended, then it's a really good feature to have. But just like I said, don't leave the USB drive in a computer that you don't want wiped, because It will. It's also unfortunate that I couldn't get the install scripts to work for this video. However, if you want to install third-party applications with the Windows install at the same time as the Windows install, I did another video that shows exactly how to do that. And you can check that video out right here. By using this process we talked about today with the method in that video right there, it could make the ultimate Windows install USB. But as always, you guys have a great day.